Susan Mitchell walked slowly through the grand entrance of the Galactic Assembly Hall. The massive doors, carved from stone brought from 100 different worlds, seemed to watch her with silent judgment. She had walked through these doors hundreds of times in her 10 years as Earth's ambassador. Today would be the last time. "Are you ready?" asked Paul Wright, the admiral who had escorted her to Centauri Prime. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his face calm but alert. "As ready as I'll ever be," Susan said. She straightened her navy blue diplomatic jacket and checked that the small earth pin on her collar was secure. "The President's orders are clear." The main chamber of the assembly was a huge room with a high ceiling that showed the stars above, through a clear dome. Around a large circular table sat representatives from over 50 alien species. Some looked almost human. Others were very different, some with extra limbs, unusual skin colors, or body shapes that seemed impossible. They all fell silent as Susan entered. "Ambassador Mitchell," said High Counselor Zixarat of the Vikrani. His tall, thin body and gray skin made him look like a living shadow. "You have asked to address the full assembly. We grant you 5 minutes." Susan walked to the speaker's platform. She felt the weight of 200 years of human history with the assembly pressing down on her shoulders. 200 years of being treated as lesser beings. 200 years of having human ideas stolen, human concerns dismissed, human rights barely acknowledged. "Honorable representatives of the Galactic Assembly," she began, her voice strong and clear. "For 2 centuries, humanity has worked in good faith to be valuable members of this interstellar community. We have shared our art, our science, our unique perspective. We have followed your rules, respected your traditions, and defended your borders alongside our own." She paused, looking at the faces around her. Most showed boredom or mild annoyance. They had already decided not to listen before she even started speaking. Yet in these 200 years, humanity has never been treated as equals. Our technology is taken and claimed as the work of others. Our requests for help are ignored. Our warnings about dangers are dismissed as primitive fear. Our people are treated as second-class citizens on assembly worlds. A few representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew she was right, but most didn't care. Therefore, by unanimous vote of Earth's Global Council and with the full support of all human colonies, I am here to formally announce that as of this moment, humanity withdraws from the Galactic Assembly. Now she had their attention. Whispers spread around the room. A few gasps could be heard. All human citizens have been ordered to leave assembly worlds within 48 hours. All human ships are returning to our territory. All technology sharing agreements are canceled. All defense treaties are ended. Earth and its colonies will now act as an independent power in the galaxy. The room erupted in shouts and arguments. Zixarat banged a metal rod against the table for order. "This is most irregular," he said when the noise died down. "No species has ever left the assembly voluntarily. There's a first time for everything," Susan replied calmly. "And what of your responsibilities? The systems you help maintain? The technologies you help operate?" Susan smiled without humor. "For 2 centuries, we've been told our ways are primitive and our help is barely tolerated. Surely the great species of the assembly can manage without us." Zixarat's face showed no emotion, but his voice was cold. "Very well. The human withdrawal is noted. Your membership is ended. You may leave." Just like that, 200 years ended with a dismissive wave. As Susan walked from the platform, she noticed a small group of Rigelians trying to catch her attention. The short blue-skinned aliens looked worried, waving data tablets. But 2 Vikrani security officers stepped between them, blocking their path. "Ambassador, please," called one Rigelian. "We need to speak about the quantum network. There's a critical issue." But Susan was already being escorted out by assembly guards. The doors closed behind her with a heavy thud. Outside the chamber, Admiral Wright was waiting with a team of human security officers. "That went about as expected," he said. "Yes," Susan agreed. "Not a tear shed at our departure, just annoyance at the inconvenience." "Their loss," said the Admiral. "Our ships are ready. All human personnel will be evacuated from assembly worlds. by tomorrow night. As they walked toward the landing pad where their shuttle waited, Susan felt lighter than she had in years. No more fighting to be heard in assembly meetings. No more watching human discoveries be claimed by other species. No more pretending that humanity was respected when they were merely tolerated. "Do you think they'll miss us?" asked a young diplomatic aide walking beside her. Susan shook her head. "They don't think they need us, they never have." The shuttle took off smoothly from Centauri Prime. Through the viewport, Susan watched the gleaming towers of the assembly capital grow smaller. The planet had been home to the galactic government for 10,000 years. The assembly itself had ruled for nearly 50,000 years, with younger species like humans only allowed to join when the elder races decided they were ready. "All human diplomatic ships are reporting in," said the pilot. "The evacuation is proceeding on schedule, no issues so far." "Good," Susan replied. "And our defense fleet?" "Taking up position along our borders," Admiral Wright said. "Just in case some of our former allies get any ideas about forcing us to stay." As their shuttle docked with the larger Earth vessel in orbit, Susan took one last look at the beautiful blue-green world below. She couldn't help feeling they were forgetting something important. The worried faces of the Rigelian scientists flashed in her mind. "Admiral," she said suddenly, "were we working on any joint projects with the Rigelians? Something about the quantum network, maybe?" Wright thought for a moment. "Yes, I believe so. Something about maintenance protocols for the communication system. Why?" "Some Rigelians tried to speak with me after the announcement. They seemed worried." The Admiral shrugged. "Too late now. If it was important, they've had 2 centuries to listen to us. They can solve their own problems for once." Susan nodded, slowly. He was right. Humanity had given enough. It was time to focus on their own future, their own path among the stars. Without the Assembly's restrictions, human innovation could finally reach its full potential. As the Earthship jumped to faster-than-light speed, heading home, neither Susan nor anyone else on board realized they had just triggered the beginning of a galactic crisis. Behind them, in the vast network of quantum relays that enabled communication and transportation across the assembly, the first small errors were already appearing. Errors that would soon grow into system-wide failures. The day humanity left the Galactic Assembly, everything began to fall apart. 3 months passed since humanity's departure from the Galactic Assembly. Earth and its colonies were busy building new trading routes and strengthening their defenses. Without assembly restrictions, human engineers could finally develop technologies that had been kept off limits for generations. Lisa Hayes sat at her monitoring station on the edge of human space. The Proxima Centauri outpost had once been a joint human assembly installation. Now it was staffed only by humans, watching the border between Earth's territory and assembly space. Lisa's job was to track ships and monitor communications. "That's odd," she said, leaning closer to her screen. "Commander Taylor, could you take a look at this?" John Taylor moved from his desk to stand behind her. "What am I looking at, Lieutenant?" "These signal patterns from the assembly quantum relay. They're showing unusual fluctuations. Been getting worse over the past week." Lisa pointed to a graph that showed jagged lines instead of the smooth curves that should have been there. "It's like their whole communication network is getting static," Taylor frowned. "Any idea what's causing it?" "No, sir. But it's affecting all channels, not just a few. Whatever it is, it's spreading." Taylor tapped his communication badge. "Record everything and send the data to Earth Command. This could be important." On Earth, the Defense Council gathered to discuss Lisa's findings. 6 men and women sat around a large table in a secure room deep under the city of New Washington. Maps and data displays covered the walls. "The quantum relay network is definitely degrading," said scientist Alan Foster. He had worked for years on the Assembly's communication systems before returning to Earth. "And it's not just communications. The transportation grid is starting to fail too. Ships are arriving at the wrong coordinates. Navigation systems are giving false readings." "Could this be deliberate?" asked General Carol Wilson. "Some kind of attack?" Alan shook his head. I don't think so. This looks more like system failure, a cascade effect that's getting worse over time. President William. Harris sat at the head of the table, his face serious. Explain why this is happening, Dr. Foster, in simple terms. When humans first joined the assembly, we helped build the quantum relay network. It was based partly on our technology, partly on theirs. We included certain safety features, backup systems, self-repair protocols, adaptive algorithms. But after the network was complete, the assembly removed most of what we added, called our work unnecessary complications. They wanted a pure, elegant system without what they saw as messy human additions. And now, asked the president, now they're seeing why those complications were necessary. The quantum network needs constant adjustment. It's not stable on its own. Our protocols would have fixed small problems automatically before they grew. Without them, the whole system is slowly falling apart. The council members exchanged looks. There was a mix of concern and, from some, a hint of satisfaction. So the mighty assembly needs our primitive human technology after all, General Wilson said with a small smile. This is more serious than just proving a point, Alan warned. The quantum network connects everything in assembly space: communication, transportation, power distribution, banking systems. If it continues to degrade, billions of lives will be affected. Some colonies completely depend on regular supply ships that can't navigate without the network. President Harris stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the rebuilt skyline of New Washington gleamed in the afternoon sun. Have they asked for our help yet? Not officially, said Susan Mitchell, who had returned to Earth after delivering humanity's withdrawal from the assembly. But I've received informal messages from several species, the Rigelians especially. They tried to warn me the day we left, but assembly security kept them away. And what do you suggest we do, Ambassador? Susan thought for a moment. Nothing yet. Let them come to us formally. Let them admit they need us. Then we negotiate from a position of strength. The president nodded slowly. I agree. We won't offer help until they ask for it. And when they do, we make sure humanity gets the respect and recognition we deserve. Meanwhile, across assembly space, the situation was getting worse. On Sirius, Hub, a major trading center halfway between Earth and the assembly core worlds, thousands of travelers were stranded as the transit gates began to fail. These massive structures used quantum technology to move ships instantly between star systems, but now they were becoming dangerously unreliable. The next gate will open in 6 hours, announced station manager Drenvac to the angry crowd. His six-limbed body moved nervously as he spoke. All travelers must wait until... He was interrupted by a loud alarm. The main screen behind him showed a ship arriving through the gate, but it was only half there. The front of the vessel emerged into normal space, but the back half was missing, cut off when the gate closed too early. Screams filled the station as people watched the crippled ship drift from the gate, atmosphere and bodies spilling into space. Emergency crews rushed to help, but for most of the crew it was already too late. Similar scenes were happening across assembly space. Power systems failed on worlds that depended on quantum energy distribution. Food shipments didn't arrive on planets that couldn't grow their own. The Vikrani banking network crashed, erasing financial records across 12 star systems and causing economic panic. In the assembly hall on Centauri Prime, an emergency session had been called. The representatives argued loudly among themselves, pointing fingers and making accusations. The Arcturians must be behind this, shouted one delegate. They never wanted to share the quantum technology. Nonsense, replied the Arcturian representative. This is clearly sabotage by the Proxians. High Counselor Zixarat tried to maintain order, but even his authority was being questioned now. Finally, he raised his voice above the chaos. Enough. Our technical experts have analyzed the problem. It appears that the quantum network is missing certain stabilizing protocols. Protocols that were part of the original human design. Silence fell over the chamber. Are you saying we need the humans to fix this? Asked a representative from a small colony world. The same humans we pushed away 3 months ago? Zixarat's gray face showed no emotion, but his voice was strained. I am saying we may need to open discussions with Earth about technical assistance, for the good of all species in the assembly. A murmur ran through the crowd. Many representatives looked unhappy, but none could offer a better solution. Humans will make us pay for this, someone said quietly. Yes, Zixarat agreed. I expect they will. As the assembly debated, a formal message was prepared and sent toward Earth. It was carefully worded to avoid admitting fault or desperation, requesting only consultation on communications infrastructure anomalies. When the message reached Earth's Defense Council, Susan Mitchell read it aloud and then looked up with a small smile. It seems the assembly has a problem they can't solve without us. What do we do? Asked General Wilson. President Harris looked around the table at his advisors. We help them, he said firmly, but on our terms. It's time humanity took its rightful place in the stars. 6 months had passed since humanity withdrew from the Galactic Assembly. The crisis across assembly space was now in full swing. What began as communication problems had grown into a full collapse of connected systems. Some worlds were completely cut off. Others faced food shortages as supply ships couldn't navigate safely. The once mighty assembly was falling apart piece by piece. On Earth, President William Harris addressed the global population through a worldwide broadcast. His face appeared on screens in homes, offices, and public squares across the planet and all human colonies. Citizens of Earth and her colonies, he began, his voice firm but calm. As you know, we have received many calls for help from worlds across assembly space. Their systems are failing. The quantum network that connects their civilization is collapsing. Millions of lives are at risk. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Assembly has formally requested our assistance. After careful discussion with the Defense Council and the Senate, I have decided that humanity will provide humanitarian aid to affected worlds. We will send engineers to help restore basic systems. We will provide food and medical supplies where needed. The President looked directly into the camera. Some will ask why we should help those who never respected us. My answer is simple: because we are human. Because we do not turn away from suffering, even when it is caused by pride and stubbornness. We will show the galaxy the true strength of humanity, not just our technology but our compassion. Not everyone agreed with the President's decision. Admiral Paul Wright stood in his office at Earth Defense Headquarters, watching the broadcast. With a frown, "This is a mistake," he said to Susan Mitchell, who had just entered the room. "We warned them about these vulnerabilities for decades. They laughed and called us primitive. Now we rush to save them?" Susan sighed. "I understand your feelings, Paul. I share some of them. But leaving billions to suffer won't help anyone. Besides, this is a chance to show our value on our own terms." "And what terms did we set?" the Admiral asked sharply. "Full recognition of human sovereignty, acknowledgement of our intellectual property rights, removal of all technology sharing restrictions, and seats on the High Council for Human Representatives." Susan smiled slightly. Zixarat almost choked when he heard that last one, but they agreed to all of it. Wright raised an eyebrow. "I'm impressed. So we're not just rushing in to rescue them without conditions." "Of course not. We're being humanitarian, not foolish." Susan handed him a tablet. "The first relief mission leaves tomorrow. Captain Maria Johnson will command the UES Horizon with a team of engineers and medical staff. They're heading to Proxima Centauri colony." The next day, the UES Horizon approached Proxima Centauri. The ship was one of Earth's newest vessels, with a sleek design that balanced function and beauty. Captain Maria Johnson stood on the bridge, watching as the blue-green world grew larger on the main screen. "No response to our hails," reported Communications Officer Steve Baker. "Their comm systems must be completely down." "Scan the surface," Maria ordered. "Look for life signs and power signatures." The science officer worked at her station, then looked up with concern. "Captain, the planet's atmospheric regulators have failed. Oxygen levels are dropping in the inhabited areas. Most of the population appears to be gathered in sealed emergency shelters, but those are running on backup power that won't last much longer." Maria nodded grimly. How many people? About 50,000, mostly Vikrani colonists with some other species. Send this data to Earth Command, then prepare landing teams. We need engineers to fix those regulators immediately. Medical teams should stand by for cases of oxygen deprivation. Within hours, human shuttles were landing near the main colony. Teams in environmental suits rushed to help. The colony's governor, a tall Vikrani named Thelvak, met Captain Johnson at the main shelter. "We never thought you would come," he admitted, his voice weak from the thin air. "The assembly told us humans were unreliable and selfish." "We're here now," Maria said simply. "Our engineers are already working on your systems. We've brought oxygen supplies and food. No one else will die today." Thelvak bowed his gray head. "Thank you. We were wrong about your species." While the rescue at Proxima Centauri was happening, the situation in the assembly hall on Centauri Prime was growing. Worse, emergency sessions had turned into shouting matches. The grand chamber that had once been a place of order and power was now filled with fear and blame. "The Vikrani have been hoarding repair parts," shouted the Rigelian representative. "Our worlds are dark while yours still have power." "Lies," responded the Vikrani delegate. "The Arcturians have stolen our emergency supplies." High Counselor Zixaret tried to maintain control, but his authority was slipping away. The assembly that had stood for 50,000 years was fracturing along old lines of distrust and rivalry. Without the communication network, without reliable transportation, the bonds that held hundreds of worlds together were breaking. And there was a new problem. Reports were coming in from the edges of assembly space about attacks on vulnerable outposts and shipping lanes. Pirates and raiders, sensing weakness, were moving in. "We have lost contact with the mining colony in the Deneb sector," reported a military officer. Before communications failed, they reported being under attack by unknown vessels. Zixarat looked tired. The proud leader who had dismissed humanity 6 months ago now seemed much older. "The Defense Force cannot respond effectively without the quantum network," he said. "We cannot coordinate our ships. We cannot even be sure where the attacks are happening until it's too late." On the outer rim of explored space, a human trading vessel picked up a distress call. Captain Frank Cooper of the merchant ship Star Road changed course to investigate. What he found was a damaged assembly transport drifting in space. Its engines dead. "We're picking up life signs," said his first officer, "but their life support is failing." "Bring us alongside," Frank ordered. "Prepare to take on survivors." The rescued passengers were mostly Rigelian families, traveling from their homeworld to a colony when their ship was attacked by raiders. They were shocked to be saved by humans. "We thought your people hated us now," said one Rigelian woman, as she accepted a blanket from a crew member. "We don't hate anyone," Frank told her, "and we don't leave people to die in space. That's not our way." When the Star Road returned to Earth space with the rescued Rigelians, the news spread quickly. More human ships began watching for distress calls. The Earth Defense Fleet increased patrols along trade routes, protecting not just human ships but any vessel under attack. Back on Earth, Dr. Alan Foster worked day and night with his team of engineers designing new systems that could replace the failing quantum network. They used parts of the old design, but added new elements, creating something that combined the best of human innovation with assembly technology. "It won't be as elegant as what they had before," he explained to President Harris during a progress briefing, "but it will be much more stable, more resilient." "Will it work?" asked the president. Alan nodded. "Yes, but implementing it across all assembly worlds will take time and cooperation. We can't do it alone." "You won't have to," said Susan Mitchell, who had just entered the room. "I've just received word from Centauri Prime. The assembly has formally requested a human delegation to discuss not just emergency aid, but a complete restructuring of the assembly itself." She smiled. "It seems the crisis has convinced them that some changes are long overdue." President Harris looked at her with surprise. "They want to change the assembly? After 50,000 years?" "Sometimes it takes a disaster to create an opportunity for real change," Susan replied. "And right now, We have the chance to help build something better than what came before. 1 year had passed since humanity withdrew from the Galactic Assembly. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The once mighty assembly was struggling to hold itself together. Many worlds were still recovering from system failures. Some outer colonies had been abandoned when help couldn't reach them in time. Ambassador Susan Mitchell stood at the viewport of the Earth diplomatic vessel as it approached Centauri Prime. The planet looked much different than when she had left it a year ago.
Many of the gleaming towers were dark. The space around the planet, once busy with thousands of ships, now held only a fraction of that number. "We're cleared to land at the main assembly port," said the pilot. "Though they apologize for limited
services. Most of their automated systems are still offline." Susan nodded. "That's why we're here." She was leading a team of Earth's best engineers and diplomats back to the assembly. Not as junior members begging for a place at the table, but as equals bringing badly needed help. Behind her diplomatic vessel came 20 more ships carrying technical crews and equipment. Admiral Paul Wright stood beside her, still not entirely happy about the mission. "I still think we should let them struggle a bit longer," he muttered. "Teach them a proper lesson." Susan smiled slightly. "They've learned their lesson, Paul. Now we show them a better way forward. That's what humans do." When they landed, Susan was surprised to see High Counselor Zixarat himself waiting to greet them. The once proud Vikrani leader looked tired, his usually perfect robes wrinkled and worn. "Ambassador Mitchell," he said with a formal bow. "Admiral Wright, on behalf of the Galactic Assembly, I welcome you back to Centauri Prime." "High Counselor," Susan replied with a small nod. "We've come as requested to discuss both emergency assistance and long-term restructuring." Zixarat led them to ground vehicles instead of the floating platforms that had once carried important visitors. "As you can see, we are operating with limited technology. Many systems are running on basic power only." The assembly hall was dimly lit when they arrived. Representatives from 37 species sat in the chamber, a much smaller number than the 50+ that had been present. When Susan last stood here, some worlds had withdrawn from assembly affairs, focusing only on their own survival during the crisis. "Honorable representatives," Zixarat began, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "I present Ambassador Susan Mitchell and Admiral Paul Wright, of Earth, along with their delegation of technical experts." Susan stepped forward to the speaker's platform. The same platform where, a year ago, she had announced humanity's withdrawal. Now she was here on very different terms. "Thank you for your invitation," she said. "Earth is prepared to assist in rebuilding critical infrastructure across assembly space. Our engineers have developed new systems that can replace the failing quantum network. Our ships are ready to help restore transportation and communication links between worlds." She paused, looking around the chamber. The faces watching her showed a mix of hope, relief, and lingering resentment. "However, before we begin this work, we require formal acknowledgement of the Treaty of New Terra, which was transmitted to you 3 days ago." Murmurs spread through the chamber. The treaty was demanding, many felt. It formally recognized humanity as equals in galactic affairs. It granted humans full rights to their own technological developments. Most significantly, it gave Earth permanent seats on the High Council, a privilege previously limited to the founding species of the Assembly. Zixarat stepped forward. "The terms are steep, Ambassador Mitchell." "The terms are fair," Susan replied, firmly. "Humanity will no longer accept second-class status. We offer partnership, not submission. If that is unacceptable, our ships can return to Earth space." The chamber erupted in worried conversation. Finally, a Rigelian representative stood. "We cannot afford to refuse. Without help, many more worlds will fail. I vote to accept the treaty." One by one, other representatives stood to agree. Some did so eagerly, others reluctantly. When the vote was complete, Zixarat approached Susan with a small data cube. "The Assembly accepts the Treaty of New Terra," he said formally. "Humanity is recognized as a full and equal partner in galactic affairs." Susan took the cube, which contained the official agreement with all representatives' signatures. "Then let's get to work." Within days, human engineering teams spread across assembly space. Dr. Alan Foster led the effort to rebuild the quantum network. In a large command center on Centauri Prime, he directed teams working on hundreds of worlds. "We're restoring the original protocols that were removed," he explained to a group of assembly scientists who watched the humans work. "But we're also adding new safety features. The network won't be as fast as before, but it will be much more stable." One Arcturian scientist looked confused. "But the redundancies you're adding create inefficiency. The system was perfect before." Alan smiled patiently. "Perfect systems are vulnerable systems. They work wonderfully until they encounter something unexpected. Then they fail completely. Imperfect systems with built-in flexibility and backup options can adapt to problems." As he spoke, screens around the room began to show green status indicators as communication nodes came back online across the galaxy. "You see?" Alan said. "It's working already." Meanwhile, in space, human ships joined with assembly vessels to defend against the raiders who had taken advantage of the crisis. Admiral Wright coordinated the defense from the flagship UES Defender. Under his command were 30 Earth ships and 20 assembly vessels. "The raiders have hit 3 more outposts in the Deneb sector," reported his tactical officer. "Their ships are fast and well armed, but they're not organized," Wright said, studying the attack patterns. "They strike targets of opportunity without overall strategy. That's their weakness." The Admiral developed a plan that used human military tactics, considered too aggressive and unpredictable by assembly standards, to drive the raiders back. Human ships would appear vulnerable, drawing the raiders in, while assembly vessels waited in hiding to trap them. "Are you certain this will work?" asked the assembly fleet commander, a tall Arcturian named Voss. "It seems reckless to use ships as bait." "Trust me," Wright said with a smile. "Sometimes the best defense is a strong offense." When the next raider attack came, Wright's plan worked perfectly. The pirates found themselves caught between two forces with nowhere to escape. Most surrendered rather than be destroyed. On Earth, factories worked overtime producing components needed for the restoration effort. Ships carried supplies to worlds that had been cut off. Human doctors treated those who had been injured or sickened during the system's failures. President Harris addressed the Earth Senate, updating them on the progress of the mission. "The Treaty of New Terra has been formally ratified by all remaining assembly members. Humanity now holds 3 permanent seats on the High Council. Our technology rights are protected, and our sovereignty is fully recognized." A senator stood to ask a question. "And what of the future, Mr. President? Will we fully rejoin the Assembly?" The President considered his answer carefully. "We will join the Reformed Assembly as equal partners. But this won't be the same organization that dismissed us a year ago. Together with those who recognize our value, we are building something new. Something better. A true cooperative of species rather than a hierarchy of the old ruling the young." Across the galaxy, as vital systems gradually came back online, people began to see the truth in those words. The old assembly had valued perfection, tradition, and the wisdom of age above all else. The new organization taking shape valued diversity, adaptation, and the strength that comes from combining different approaches. The day humanity left the Galactic Assembly, everything had indeed fallen apart. But from that collapse, something stronger was beginning to emerge. 5 years had passed since the day humanity left the Galactic Assembly. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted on that fateful day, when Ambassador Susan Mitchell had walked out of the Assembly Hall. The rebuilt Assembly Hall on Centauri Prime was packed with representatives from over 100 worlds. The new chamber looked very different from the old one. Gone was the cold, perfect architecture that had stood unchanged for millennia. In its place was a blend of styles from across the galaxy, including clearly human elements. The rigid seating arrangement that had once placed elder species at the center and newer members at the edges had been replaced by a true circle where all seats were equal. Susan Mitchell, now serving as Earth's first High Counselor, stood to address the gathered representatives. At 55, her hair had more gray than before, but her eyes were as sharp and determined as ever. 5 years ago today, humanity withdrew from the Assembly, she began. We did not know then that our departure would trigger such profound changes. We only knew that we could no longer accept being treated as lesser beings in a system that claimed to value all life. She looked around at the faces watching her. Unlike in the past, these faces showed respect and attention. The crisis that followed taught us all an important lesson. True strength does not come from age or tradition alone. It does not come from perfect systems that cannot bend or adapt. It comes from diversity, not just diversity of species, but diversity of thought and approach. Across the chamber, High Counselor Zixaret nodded in agreement. The Vikrani leader had changed too. The pride and rigidity that had once defined him had softened. He had led the effort to reform the assembly from within, working closely with humans to create something new. The new galactic cooperative that we have built together is stronger than the old assembly ever was, Susan continued. Not because it is perfect, but because it accepts imperfection as the price of growth and adaptation. On screens throughout the chamber, data showed the progress of the past 5 years. The rebuilt quantum network now connected more worlds than ever before, but with new safeguards and backup systems. Trade had surpassed pre-crisis levels. Scientific breakthroughs were happening at an unprecedented rate as species shared knowledge freely, rather than hoarding it. After the formal session ended, Susan walked with Zixaret through the gardens outside the chamber. The gardens, too, had been redesigned, featuring plants from dozens of worlds growing together. Would you ever have imagined this outcome, High Counselor? Susan asked. Zixaret made a sound that was the Vikrani equivalent of a small laugh. Never. My people have led the assembly for 10,000 years. We believed our way was the only correct path. We were wrong. We all were, in some ways, Susan admitted. Humans were too quick to take offense, too determined to prove ourselves. We could have tried harder to work within the system. Perhaps, said Zixaret, or perhaps the system needed to break before it could be truly fixed. Sometimes creation requires destruction first. On the human colony world of New Horizon, Dr. Alan Foster had established the Galactic Science Academy. The sprawling campus housed researchers from hundreds of species, all working together on projects that would have been impossible before. In his office, decorated with technical diagrams and awards, Alan showed visitors the latest breakthrough, a new form of energy generation that combined human ingenuity with Arcturian precision engineering. The old assembly believed in keeping species separate, letting each develop in their own way without contamination from others, he explained to a group of students from 20 different worlds. But look at what we can achieve together. In space, the Joint Defense Fleet patrolled the borders of cooperative territory. Admiral Paul Wright, now approaching retirement, stood on the bridge of his flagship beside Captain Voss, his former assembly counterpart who now served as his second-in-command. The raiders haven't tried to breach our space in over a year, Voss reported. The new defense grid is working perfectly. Not perfectly, Wright corrected with a smile. Just well enough. Remember, perfection is the enemy of reliability. Voss nodded. It had taken him time to accept the human approach to military matters, but the results spoke for themselves. The combined fleet, using tactics from both traditions, was more effective than either had been alone. On Earth, President William Harris prepared to leave office after serving 2 terms. In his garden at the presidential residence, he spoke with Maria Johnson, the captain who had led the first relief mission 5 years ago and who was now being considered as the next Earth representative to the High Council. Did we make the right choice? He asked her, looking up at the stars visible in the evening sky. Leaving the assembly when we did? Coming back to help them when they needed us? Maria thought for a moment before answering. I think we did. Sometimes, you have to step away from a bad situation before anyone will notice the problem. And sometimes you have to come back and help fix it instead of just saying, I told you so. Harris smiled. That seems to be the human way, doesn't it? To push boundaries and break rules, but also to help put things back together afterward. Across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, life had returned to normal for most people. But it was a new normal. Species that had once looked down on newer races now worked alongside them as equals. Technologies that had once been restricted to elder species were now shared openly. The rigid hierarchy that had defined galactic society for 50,000 years had been replaced by something more flexible, more open to change and growth. Not everyone was happy with these changes. Some of the elder species still resented the loss of their privileged positions. Some isolated worlds had withdrawn completely, rather than join the new cooperative. But most recognized that the galaxy was stronger now than it had been before. The crisis. In a classroom on Rigel Prime, a young student asked her teacher why the old assembly had failed. Because they forgot that strength comes from difference, not sameness, the teacher explained. They wanted everything to be perfect and unchanging. But life doesn't work that way. Life adapts, evolves, finds new paths forward. The humans reminded us of that truth when they left and again when they returned to help us rebuild. The teacher looked out at her class, which included children from species that would never have studied together under the old system. Remember this lesson, she told them. The day humanity left the Galactic Assembly, everything fell apart. But what we built from those broken pieces is stronger and better than what came before.